I think what bothers me in some ways is that DDoS might well be a solvable problem. We might be able to go after denial of service attacks, but we're putting responsibility in the wrong place. We seem to respond to this by saying we need a U.S. cyber command. What we might need actually is internet service providers to take responsibility for kicking compromised computers off their networks. If it's clear that there's a particular pattern of activity from your computer that indicates that it's likely to be virus-ridden and part of a botnet, it would be really smart for ISPs to be warning their customers and then eventually blocking their customers. But that's how you'd have to go after these things. You either have to pull computers out of the botnets, which you would do through internet service providers, or you have to go through the people who run these botnets. But I got to tell you, I think that second task is pretty difficult. We've seen people go after Russian Business Network, which was one of the largest botnet operators. They turned out to be extraordinarily difficult to find. So I guess I realize I'm being an engineer with this, but I would love to see us, rather than turning this into, we'll let the Air Force take over cyberspace, a problem that engineers can and should solve.
So are you advocating a kind of three strikes and you're out approach that now is also being advocated for piracy, that if you've been notified, say, 3 times that your computer is part of a botnet, and if taking no measures, you'll just be disconnected?
I am at no point putting a specific policy on the table. What I am saying is that, for the most part, internet service providers are not actively going after compromised computers on their network. And I think they should be, and I think that they should have an incentive to do so. And whether that becomes a legal requirement or whether it's just best policy, I would love to see one or more internet service providers say, we're going to go after this because this is a real problem and we're spending a lot of time dealing with it.
But don't you think that the effort should actually be to try to make citizens and consumers themselves more aware about what's going on their computers and actually go after them as opposed to the service providers? Because my feeling is that, it's because we don't really understand the nature of the threat and we don't really, protect ourselves as internet users as well as we could be. And that's the reason why, our computer is often compromised. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I went to Estonia twice this year to write a few stories on how Estonians have dealt with the consequences of their own denial of service attacks in 2007. And what I basically discovered is that they have actually introduced the course in, I think, their primary school curriculum, which basically introduces kids from a very early age to the very basics of cybersecurity. So, if you are a 7-year-old Estonian, chances are you already know what botnets are and what denial of service attacks are, and by extension, you will probably be much more likely to install the latest antivirus and keep your computer more secure. And unfortunately, in the context of the policy deliberations here in this country, in the U.S., I don't see any educational measures being discussed at all as policy solutions. I mean, what we seem to be arguing about is securing our networks, making more data more classified, and basically making sure that there is no open debate about these issues. And I think this is what has hurt the debate so far, that, we are operating in this very secretive environment in which attacks on power grids may have happened, but they also may not have happened. I mean, all we know is that someone spoke to a Wall Street Journal reporter off the record, and this basically now drives the U.S. policy, and there is no pressure on the government whatsoever to be more open and transparent about it. So I think that's what's causing so much misunderstanding, and reporters have to rely on terms like cyber warfare in the absence of any hard facts released by the government.
So I absolutely agree with you that more transparency would be helpful around this. I don't know whether doing basic cyber education is a realistic strategy, in part because we're already so deep into this problem, and I guess I'm looking for a more immediate solution. But I think two things we can sort of agree on here. One is that having this turn into a government-level intervention, and particularly one where secrecy appears to be the main thing on the table, is probably undesirable. I think the second thing that we probably agree on, although I think we're in slightly different valence on this, perhaps, is that for the most part, the media is getting the story wrong. Which is to say, they're oversimplifying, they're blurring together a wide range of attacks and stories. If we were getting far better stories, for instance, if that Wall Street Journal story ended with 3 paragraphs saying, by the way, you may in fact be attacking the US and South Korea, here's how to find out and here's what to do, that might be very helpful.